Very much, Speaker, for the opportunity to weigh in on the yet again another time allocation. And basically what that means is they're limiting the debate, Speaker. They don't want us to talk any longer about the ORPP. And so you have to ask yourself, why? Why do they not want us talking about the ORP? What is it that they don't want the people to hear? And I'll go once again, as I do many times in this legislature, Speaker, I go to the gas plant scandal hearing documents, because those 300,000 pages were a treasure trove, an inside look into the thinking of this Liberal government. And back during the gas plant scandal, we actually obtained confidential internal document, and one document was entitled, quote, "Confidential Advice to Cabinet Not Recommended," quote. And this was a document that warned the newly elected Premier, or newly appointed Premier, that the province will lose 18,000 jobs for every $2 billion collected under this pension tax. As this is now a $6 billion plan, that's 54,000 job losses. And this government knew that, Speaker. They knew that they would jeopardize 54,000 jobs when they implemented this anyway. The government was told in this confidential document that the long-term behavioral impact of this tax would be lower business investment, relocation of businesses to other jurisdictions, reduced work effort, and an out-migration of people. In fact, of all the revenue tools the government was considering, the payroll tax had the largest negative impact. It's not a tax. Well, Speaker, I hear from the other side that it's not a tax. With all the taxes this Liberal government had brought on, you'd think they'd actually know what a tax was by now.
Eco-fees.
The government also commissioned ECOS, a prominent public affairs and polling company, to assess the impact of the ORPP. They found that 54% of businesses are considering a hiring freeze. This is the government's own research, Speaker, that they conducted. 54% considering a hiring freeze. 2/3 of businesses would make operating cuts. Speaker, this is their own research. Large businesses would consider layoffs as well as cancelling existing pension plans. This is what they were told through their own research. Small businesses told them that they will redefine employees from full-time to contract workers to avoid the ORPP. In total, they were told 60% of businesses expect to be hurt by the ORPP. And this information only came to light because the Canadian Taxpayer Federation filed a Freedom of Information request. And in fact, the Canadian Taxpayer Federation concluded, quote, "It's remarkable the Ontario government didn't walk away from the ORPP when they saw their own research. The ORPP is being sold as a benefit to Ontario employees, when in reality it will mean many of them will end up worse off." So further, the government decided to do additional research, and they did the cost-benefit analysis that was performed by the Conference Board of Canada. Now, again, this was commissioned by the government's Ministry of Finance. In this report, it admitted it will take 20 years before the economy recovers from the shock of the ORPP. They calculate and told their client, the Government of Ontario, the job losses, in their estimation, will peak at 23,000 in 2023. Real disposable income and consumption spending will remain lower until 2040. This will lead to a fall in real private investment that peaks at $939 million. It's almost $1 billion lost. And that will peak in 2024. And when does the report, Speaker, say that good news kicks in? Well, that, Speaker, will be 2093. Yeah, this will kick in 75 years. Go for it. Yeah. It'll kick in then. That's the government's own research. That's why they don't want us here debating this new tax, Speaker. This is exactly why. they don't want us debating their new tax. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business stated in their pre-budget submission to our ORPP, on the ORPP, would lead to a loss of 160,000 person years of employment. They also noted that 90% of their members do not support the ORPP. That's up from 86% from last year. 69% of their members say they'll freeze or cut salaries. 53% said they would cut jobs if the ORPP goes ahead. They concluded the ORPP tax will significantly undermine the competitiveness of Ontario businesses. This is what the government is being told. This is why they don't want us any longer, after today, to be debating this new tax. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce presented a letter to the government opposing the ORPP. They urged the government to expand the definition of comparable plans and exempt many of the businesses from participating. It was signed by 150 of Ontario's key stakeholders. This included Magna, Chrysler, Ford, GM, Canadian Tire, GE, Walmart, Maple Leaf Foods, and the list goes on and on. They were joined by 57 of Ontario's local chambers of commerce and many associations throughout Ontario, all telling the Government of Ontario that only 26% of their members can afford the increased cost of the ORPP, and 44% of its members will reduce employees or hire fewer staff. Speaker, the key to remember is that it's impossible to save for retirement if you don't have a job. And every one of these organizations is telling the government that jobs will be cut. They will actually achieve the opposite of what they're trying to do here. Over the summer, the chairman of Fiat Chrysler, Sergio Marchionne, talked about how Ontario is becoming the most expensive jurisdiction in which to do business. He's talking North America-wide now. He's talking about our skyrocketing hydro rates. He specifically brought up the ORPP.
Well, that's not effective.
This is what's happening. And he also talked about the fact that because there will be job losses from this, there will be fewer people in a position to buy the cars he makes. This has got a downward spiral effect, Speaker, that is going to hurt families right across Ontario. The Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, another group with 750,000 employees, they talked about how this ORPP tax will lead to more layoffs and wage freezes. Survey of their members say as many as 35% will lay off staff to cope with the additional costs associated with the ORPP tax. About 68% said they would eliminate wage increases or bonuses to pay for those additional costs. I can tell you, Speaker, when I was in London, Ontario, a little while ago, there was a business person there, and we were talking about the cost of doing business in Ontario, and what he told us, our group, was that he's got 15 employees, and he plans on firing one of them to use that salary to pay for his share of the other 14 ORPP, and he knows his employees are not going to want to take a 1.9% reduction, because don't forget, the employees, this is not a government pension. This is not the government giving you a pension. This is your money, 1.9% of your salary, $1,634, $1,643 every year will come off your paycheck, and your employer must kick in the same amount. So what he said is he's going to fire one employee and use that salary to pay for not only his share, but likely he'll end up paying for his employee's share as well, because they're not going to want to take a haircut on their paycheck. And that's anecdotally what's happening right across Ontario. That's why all these companies are saying they're going to have layoffs, because they need that money to pay for the additional costs coming from the ORPP. Speaker, there's lots of talk about whether this is actually just yet another cash grab under the guise of infrastructure. Right from day one, we understood. If you look at a letter to the editor from the Associate Minister of Finance, Mitzi Hunter, I was so disturbed at her letter to the editor that I sent a follow-up letter to the Globe and Mail last July, and I'll read it to you. It says, to the letter to the editor, I was disturbed with the letter to the editor from Ontario's Associate Finance Minister Mitzi Hunter. Referring to the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan, she states, quote, the government will not determine where and how contributions are invested, and that the government is establishing an independent body to manage and administer the ORPP. That is not what the government told the legislature. In the 2014 budget, it states, quote, by unlocking value from assets and encouraging more Ontarians to save through the new ORPP, new pools of capital would be available for projects such as roads, bridges and transit. I'm offended, Speaker, because what was presented to us in the legislature is a complete opposite of what the public was being told, and that's another reason, Speaker, why they want to shut down debate, because they don't want us disclosing all of these things that are contrary to what we're being told. Hear, hear. Thank you, Speaker.
Hear, hear.